So Aaron, so now I understand, this is a tough road to navigate as an individual. What role does Ascent play in differentiating from anybody else out there so the consumer, your customers will have a clear path?
Great question. Thanks for asking that, Jeff. Um, as I mentioned very, very early on in these training modules, uh, the Ascent Network is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We've been that since our inception in 2004. We received our 501c3 exemption in 2013 by the federal government, but we have been operating as a California nonprofit ever since 2009, its inception. There are two platforms in which credit repair companies can operate. The first platform is the platform of a for-profit company. The first two companies that I also alluded to in the introduction to this training, the first two companies that I started, those were both for-profit companies. There is a myriad of regulations and laws that are in place that are there for specific purposes. They're there to regulate and monitor what the creditors can and cannot do. They're there to regulate and monitor what the credit reporting agencies can and cannot put out to the public. And then they are also there to monitor what the consumer's rights are, what the consumer can and cannot do as it revolves or relates to their own credit profile. And so, with that being said, for-profit companies are just that. They're companies that are for-profit. I have to, I guess, make a kind of a disclaimer at this point in time, and it's one that I'm not proud of making, but there's a lot of bad players in this field, and there's no getting around it. There are a lot of people out there that are willing to take advantage of individuals that have hit a speed bump in the road financially, or that are in a bad way financially. And they take advantage of those people because those people are in a situation where they're willing to do just about anything to get back on track. They're desperate. Their car broke down. They got to get to work. They got to go get a new car. They're about ready to lose their house, or interest rates are 1.5%, 2% higher than the interest rate they're paying is 2%, 2.5% higher than what they could get today. That's a savings of $500, maybe $1,000 per month to that family. That's real and serious money, and they're desperate to get those types of things. And then you've got these shady characters that call themselves credit repair companies that are out there that are just looking to pluck some money away. Now, how can you tell the shady ones? How can you tell the wheat from the chaff, so to speak? Well, if you start hearing, or your consumer, your client makes a comment about guarantees within 30, 60, 90 days, credit scores are going to go up, some say by 100 points. I just flat tell the client, if you're considering one of those companies, take the money that you're going to spend with that company and go to Vegas. You probably aren't going to win.
Wow.
But if you do, you'll be able to pay off all your debts. But you're probably not going to win, but you are going to have a good time. Okay?
Yeah.
Giving it to one of those companies that make these claims that sound great, it's just not going to happen. And here's why it's not going to happen. Here's why I can be as emphatic as I am about that statement. There are a group, or there is a group of actually, I have 5 listed here, but there are actually a group of 7 federal laws and acts that govern this industry. The first is the Consumer Credit Protection Act. The second is the Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act. The third is the Fair Credit Billing Act. The fourth is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. The fifth is the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act. The sixth, which is not on this sheet, is the Credit Service Organizations Act. And the last and final, the seventh, is the Credit Repair Organizations Act. Now, those 7 acts all either give the guidelines that the game has to be played, whether, I don't care what team you're on, whether you're the creditor, the credit bureau, or the consumer. But they lay out in detail, from a collective aspect, how the game is played. And the credit bureaus, they have battalions of attorneys that have gone through each one of these laws and acts. They know where they can push the envelope. They know where, to be honest with you, they can flat ignore the envelope. Creditors, the same way. They are very well represented from a legal perspective, and they know what they have to do, what they don't have to do. And then the consumer. Now, I would say that your client maybe has heard of one of these. The Fair Credit Reporting Act, the FCRA. That's kind of the cornerstone act. But past that, they couldn't tell you anything more about any of these acts. And certainly they can't even begin to quote any benefit that even the Fair Credit Reporting Act gives them, the consumer. They have no idea. So when it comes to protecting themselves, guarding against, they need a credit repair company. Now, I've talked about the bad players in this field so far. Does that mean that all of the players out there on a for-profit basis or a for-profit platform are bad? No, it does not. No, it does not. There are some companies out there that do things pretty much exactly the same way we do. They follow these federal laws because that's the secret sauce, is knowing the federal laws and what they say and how you navigate through them. All right? The difference between Ascent, and which kind of takes me to the second platform, is you have the for-profit platform. You also have the non-profit platform. Now, Ascent operates on the non-profit platform. Basically, that provides 2 primary benefits for the individual. Number 1 is the fees and rates of Ascent are regulated and approved by both the federal government and by the state of California, where we're domiciled. Okay? So what does that mean? That means that everybody pays the same price. Doesn't matter whether you live in Newport Beach, California, or whether you live in Tupelo, Mississippi. You're going to pay the same rate structure. Being a nonprofit also means that our rates have to be what the government feels is a fair and equitable price for all segments of the population. So if you live in a high rent district, you're not going to pay more money. And conversely, if you're in a low rent district or an economically oppressed area, you're not going to pay the same price that someone in Newport Beach, California, or the high price that for-profit companies can charge those people in those economic advantaged areas.
Because a for-profit, they could look at it and say, hey, we're in the demographic of the Newport Beach, and we're going to raise our prices for those people.
Definitely so, and they do something else, and that is, on the surface, when you talk to one of these for-profit companies, their rate and fee structure seems very comparable in some respects to Ascent, but the devil's always in the details. And after you're working with some of these companies for 2, 3, 4 months, and they may have had a little bit of success, okay, they've gotten the low-hanging fruit, couple of pieces, couple of items removed from a credit report, they come back to the client and they make a statement, or the client will hear, and many of your clients will have heard exactly the same thing, and that is, well, Mr. and Mrs. Client, we didn't realize when we initially opened this file, you represented to us that you just had a few, 3, 4, 5 cases that needed to go after. Well, now we've looked at your credit profile, and you've actually got 9 negative items on your credit profile. So the price we initially quoted you was for those first 3, 4, 5 items, whatever it was. Well, for the additional 6 that we need to go after now, it's going to be an additional charge of $400 or $500. So the consumer is sitting there thinking, well, okay, I've seen some success so far. Okay, fine. I'll just go and pay that extra dollar amount. Or they'll hear something like this. Again, 60 days, 90 days in. Well, Mr. Client, we didn't realize that you had a judgment. We didn't realize you had a bankruptcy. We didn't realize, fill in the blank, okay, a tax lien, a repossession, a foreclosure. Well, those take, Mr. Client, special handling. And that special handling is going to cost you a little more money. So at the end of the day, Ascent has found that our fee structure works out to being about 1/2 to 1/3 of what our for-profit competitors charge, the legitimate ones, for the same exact work. 1/2 to 1/3 of the cost. Makes a substantial difference to the client's overall financial recovery, to be quite honest with you. That's the first thing that separates a for-profit against a nonprofit. The second thing is our regulatory oversight. In 2009, I started Ascent by wanting to give back to the public a little bit. This business has been good to me over the years, and I wanted to give back. And I thought that being a nonprofit would be a way to do and go about doing that. Well, what I didn't bank on, and what I've come to find out is probably the biggest benefit for me as well as the consumer, is the fact that being a nonprofit totally separates me. I'm like cut out of the herd. And why am I cut out of the herd? Because those 7 acts, most specifically the Credit Repair Organizations Act, that requires me as a nonprofit on a quarterly basis to file reports with both the state of California and the federal government. And while it may not be a very pretty sight, I have to basically stand naked in front of the state of California, in front of the IRS. And I have to show them where every dollar of revenue has been generated, where every penny of expenditure has gone. And then probably the most important thing for the consumer's protection is if there has been an issue with any consumer, I have to be able to show how that issue has been resolved to the consumer's benefit or to the consumer's satisfaction. I don't get a vote in that. So Ascent has to be proactive in its reporting. Whereas my for-profit companies, the only time they're looked at by a regulator is if there's an investigation of the company, if there have been enough complaints filed by consumers against that company, and if those complaints warrant a large enough infraction that it makes it worthwhile for that federal agency to dictate resources or channel resources to open an investigation. And what normally happens is there's a couple of letters that are sent out. We've gotten a complaint from Mr. Smith. We've gotten a complaint from Mr. Jones. And are you doing this, and this? And the minute one of these companies get those types of letters, especially the companies that operate in the gray area, let's say, they just pull their shingle down, move 6 blocks down the street, hang up a different shingle, and now it's new game.
Wow.
So it separates us from the herd. It provides an automatic protection for the consumer. And then the last reason is our fee structure is much more competitive than our for-profit competitors. So that's what differentiates Ascent from everyone else out there, even the legitimate for-profit competitors that are in this business.